Hi, Chris McClune here with Fire Apparatus and Emergency Equipment. Welcome to this episode of our podcast. It's another FEMSA episode today, and we're going to be talking about NFPA 1970. That is a PPE standard. I've got Peter Askey again here. He's the FEMSA president, and he's going to introduce our two guests, Bill Van Lent and Wells Bullard. So, Peter, take it away. And then Peter's going to step away, and it's going to be a conversation with Wells, me, and Bill. Take it away, Peter.
Thanks, Chris. Today, we're lucky to have Wells Bullard, the president of Bullard, E.D. Bullard and Company, and Bill Van Lent, president of Veridian, a Lakeland company. Both of these folks have been in this industry a long time and really understand a lot about PPE, helmets, and garments. And they should be very, very good at this podcast. So I'm looking forward to listening to it. Thank you.
All right, great. Thank you, Peter. We will see you soon. Well, another month. You'll be back on, whether you like it or not.
Thank you. Talk to you later.
Okay, well, I want to thank both of you for joining me today. NFPA 1970 has been a little tricky, but for a variety of reasons. But also the NFPA, combining all of these standards at times has also become a little tricky for the industry. We've been very used. I mean, on the apparatus side, for example, we've been very used to NFPA 1901 for years and years and years, and now it's 1900, and it's combined 1901, 1906 for wildland, as well as the ARC standard and the ambulance standard. So NFPA has been doing this a lot. 1970 is no different. It is the combination of several standards. Bill, I wanted to start with you. Would you just provide a brief overview of NFPA 1970, what those standards are that are combined, and just that brief, just a little bit of a historical perspective of how we got to where we are with it?
Sure thing, Chris. For any of our listeners that maybe aren't that familiar with NFPA, I'd probably start off by saying the NFPA has been around for about 125 years, really started off with kind of a technical consolidation or a technical support of the fire sprinkler system. And so it's a consensus building organization with regard to these standards. It's been around for quite some time. And of course, now here we're talking about NFPA 1970. 1970 is a consolidation of basically three different standards that are out there, actually four different standards that are out there. The first being NFPA 1971, which was the standard on protective ensembles for structural and proximity firefighting. Then also NFPA 1975, which was the standard on emergency services work apparel. And then NFPA 1981 is in the standard now, which is a standard on open circuit self-contained breathing apparatus. And then NFPA 1982, which is the standard on personal alert safety systems. So many of the consolidations have been like really similar type products. With 1970, they aren't necessarily, you wouldn't think they would be together like that. But again, the consolidation process was in an effort to become more efficient and more effective as far as the standards go. Many people don't probably realize, but the standards, the consensus standards process really involves a fairly large number of people, and all the participants in the technical committees and correlating committees with those are all volunteers, or pretty much all of them are volunteers. So they volunteer their time and their expense in travel and the time in the standards development process. And it can be kind of a arduous, long process as you go through that. So that's kind of the background and how we got to where we are, Chris.
Now, Wells, Bill alluded to some of the reasons why the NFPA has chosen to roll standards into one. But is there anything else about these particular standards? Bill mentioned these you wouldn't necessarily think of these as all coming together. What were some of the reasons why these particular standards are rolled into 1970?
Yeah, so as Bill mentioned, the efficiency and the effectiveness, I think the decision to roll these standards into one really came down to clarity and consistency. So bringing them together under NFPA 1970, now the fire service has just a single unified standard for structural and proximity PPE and SVAs and pass systems. So it really just makes it clearer and more consistent for the fire service.
Okay. So we have NFPA 1970. it went into effect actually almost a year ago, September 2024, but that really wasn't the end of the story. Bill, could you talk to me about what the status of the standard is right now? In fact, another question I was going to get to later was really appropriate now is talk about the status of it right now and what is important about September 2025 when it comes to NFPA 1970.
Okay, yes. The traditionally, with regard to NFPA standards, particularly the clothing standard, in the NFPA 1971, is once the standard is adopted, there is a fairly long process that needs to then occur with regard to all of the performance testing and qualification and so on and so forth, with regard to the performance parameters and those issues that encompass the new standard. So as a result, generally there's an 18-month time frame from the time the standard is adopted till the final standard must be implemented. So that gives manufacturers as well an opportunity to continue manufacturing up to the point where they get their certification and then they can transition over to the new standard. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, all of the laboratory testing and all of the issues that have to happen there. The one unique aspect about NFPA 1970, at least currently, is that they shortened that time period from 18 months to 12 months. So from September of 2024, the final implementation date was targeted for September of 2025. The amount of testing and so on that's associated with that is fairly substantial, particularly with the advent of a restricted substance list. So there's a lot of challenges associated with hitting that time. And I'm not sure how many people are aware of this, but there was a TIA, or a tentative interim amendment, that was issued and voted on by the technical committees and correlating committees to go ahead and extend that implementation date to the 18 months that we normally would expect. So that would push it all the way out to March of 2026. Now that standard, or that tentative interim amendment, that TIA, was successfully balloted. So it is anticipated that it's going to now get extended out until March. But the final say on that will happen by the Standards Council, which meets, I believe, in August.
Have there been any delays involved with this that impact either you or Wells with producing product? I mean, has there been anything major that way, or is this, besides the TIA, is this pretty much just the normal course that it goes?
So I can speak for a manufacturer like Bullard. It just meant adjusting our timelines and keeping close communication with our customers. The good news is we've been designing to meet the proposed requirements, so the delay doesn't really stop us from moving forward. And again, it's really critical to get the standard right and to make sure all the systems are in place for, again, firefighters to get approved, tested equipment. So that's what's really important.
How about you, Bill?
Yeah, I would echo Wells' comments there. I mean, it hasn't created any problems for us whatsoever, but again, there is a lot of timing and logistics that happen with regard to making sure we can transition from, the current standard to the new standard. So it hasn't created a problem yet, but everything seems to be on track.
So it's a new standard. How does, Wells, I'll start with you. How does NFPA 1970 impact your products? In this case, we're talking about the helmets, of course.
Yeah, exactly. So Bullard has fire helmets that are impacted by the 1970 for both structural and wildland. So just for structural, sorry. So is the new requirements affect our fire helmets. And the main one is for the soft goods in the helmet to meet the restricted substance limits for many hazardous materials. And that's really it. There's also some new non-incentive and intrinsically safe requirements for any electrical components. So we have an integrated track lighting system that then is subject to those non-incentive and intrinsically safe requirements.
Well, how about you? How does NFPA 1970 impact you or your products?
Well, I think on the protective clothing side, I mean, it's quite a bit of effect because, as Wells indicated, the soft goods, the fabrics, those sorts of things are the areas where there's kind of a lot of focus. So as we know, there's the restricted substance list or limits that are on the products. All of the materials will have to be tested to meet these requirements. There's also an optional labeling opportunity to be able to label as basically, alkaline, floral alkaline product free sort of labeling that might be available for even a higher level of testing. So it's requiring a fairly substantial amount of coordination with regard to our raw material suppliers, because they have to do a lot of this testing as their components are component certified. So there's a lot of behind the scenes action going on right now, and the testing laboratories are really busy.
Now, there was a workshop in April, just this past April 2025. It was at NFPA, and it was regarding PPE. What was the reasoning behind that workshop? I guess, what did it accomplish, and did it impact anything that's going on, behind the scenes right now, as you just mentioned? Is it impacting any of that? So what was the purpose of that workshop, and what did it accomplish regarding NFPA 1970?
The workshop was held back in April, and there was kind of NFPA invited kind of a representative list of affected organizations and companies and so on and so forth with regard to this new standard. The objective, I think, was to get a handle on how people are progressing and what are some of the concerns. I think one of the areas, as we've alluded to a couple of times now, is one of the more complicating aspects is the restricted substance limits that are associated with this. And a lot of that criteria was very, very late in finalizing with regard to the list. Because again, it was, the concerns and a lot of the issues are probably far outreaching the settled science as it relates to a lot of this. So we've got a lot of interest from the end user community, a lot of interest obviously from the manufacturers. And so then the standard itself has to try and acclimate to what's going on there. So they brought this group together to kind of understand what were the issues, and do we really need to be making preparation for any sort of problems that might surface. And I think as a result of that, I believe the TIA came out to go ahead and extend the final validity date of the standard out to March of 2026. And we'll see. So NFPA is certainly listening and hearing. I know there was also some real concerns with the kind of a large number of TIAs, or these tentative interim amendments. So ordinarily, these are brought in if there's new information, or if there's something was missed, or there was some sort of issue with regard to the standard as it was adopted. In this case, there's been quite a few TIAs. So I think that's also kind of a signal to NFPA that maybe we need to go back and take a look at this and make sure we got all this correct.
Is that typical to have this many, or was this kind of an outlier to have this many TIAs? Because obviously we've gone through revisions before of the previous standards. Is this one kind of a little weird in that respect, where there have been a greater number of TIAs? And either one of you can answer that one.
Yeah, well, I would say, as I should probably have mentioned this at the outset of the meeting. I represent FEMSA on the correlating committee, so I have the opportunity to kind of, be involved in the standards development process, being in kind of the sausage making, if you will, that happens with regard to that. And so, yes, Chris, I think it is slightly unusual, the number of TIAs that have surfaced with regard to 1970. As indicated earlier, that was a bit of a signal to NFPA to kind of circle the wagons and see what's going on. I don't think it's a cause of alarm. This is kind of plowing new ground with regard to what's happening with NFPA 1970 and trying to get our hands around this restricted substance limits and, all those things. So, there was a lot of new material and a lot of work being done on that. And I think this coming on the heels as well of the kind of COVID situation. The standards development process used to be very personal, where people got together in a room and everybody hammered these things out, and we could generally foresee if there were some sort of issues. on the heels of the kind of pandemic related changes, a lot of these meetings now are held via teleconference, and I would just say personally that they're not quite as effective as when you can get everybody in a room and get them focused on what needs to be done, and people are able to identify where there's some issues might be. So I think we're just kind of vetting out those kinds of issues and getting that resolved.
Well, it's got to be nice too, though, in that, I kind of equate it to like the overnight DJ, on a radio station where you're kind of wondering, is anybody listening? I'm playing these songs. I'm asking for feedback. Is anybody out there? So it must be actually kind of nice that, there are a lot of people watching this. They're paying attention to it and they're asking questions and they are making suggestions as to potential changes, through or not changes, but maybe additions or alterations via the TIA. So that's got to be important. But you just mentioned this is sort of new ground, with 1970. Wells, what do you think are some of the biggest changes in NFPA 1970, and how will they impact the industry overall? Now, whether it's just the PPE manufacturing industry or even the fire service, it's always interesting. People will talk to me about the industry, but I'm never sure if they're talking about like the manufacturing side or if they're talking about the fire service. So if you could comment on either or both, what are some of the biggest changes with 1970, and what will their impact be on the industry?
Yeah, so for me, it's always about the firefighters, right? It's always about the fire service. So I think that, as was stated before, the consolidation of the standards into one comprehensive standard, that is a significant move. I mean, that obviously took a lot of work, and it just simplifies, does that clarity and consistency, and it simplifies things for fire departments, as well as then manufacturers and then the safety officers as well. The second is what Bill mentioned on the increased focus on contamination control. It's just the fire service is much more aware of long-term health risks that they face, and the standard reflects that. For the industry of the manufacturers, right? So for people providing safety equipment, it raises the bar. I mean, every evolution of a standard should be raising the bar. And that's a good thing because that drives innovation in materials and solutions, and that's just good for the fire service overall. And just pushing, again, the way that the standards are created. Obviously, firefighters their voice is very important in that standards development. And so this just reflects evolution thereof, right?
Where do the FEMSA user information guides come into play with the standard and with the products that you provide? Wells, I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, I think Bill's probably better equipped to talk through that, right? The user guides?
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Yeah,
as part of the standard, as part of the original NFPA 1971 and now the 1970 standard, a user information guide is a required component in order to meet the requirements of the NFPA standard. And the user information guide provides valuable information to the product user on how the product is supposed to be, utilized, how it's to be donned and doffed, and how it's supposed to be cleaned and inspected, and so on and so forth. So it really kind of synthesizes a lot of the elements of in this case, the 1970 standard, as well as the 1850 standard, which is the selection, care, and use standard for these products. So yes, and FEMSA has a comprehensive user information guide program that provides its members an opportunity then to utilize this user information guide. It's well developed, it's digital, so it's an opportunity for members to be able to use that.
Well, as you mentioned a minute ago about the firefighter's voice when it comes to these standards, I'm a firefighter. I've heard all the complaints, about stuff, but I don't know that the majority of firefighters out there realize that they can have a voice with these standards as they are developed. And so I just start with you, Wells, to both of you. how do firefighters get involved with the standards process?
Yeah, so great question. So firefighters actually play a huge role in shaping and developing the standards, which they should, right? They're the key users of these standards and of the products that the standards are regulating. So NFPA committees are made up of actually a really diverse group of people. There's manufacturers, there's safety officers, there's researchers, testing labs, and then really importantly, there's active and retired firefighters. And they're bringing that real world, that frontline perspective that keeps the standards grounded in what actually happens on the job so that we can make sure that we are evolving the standards in ways that enhance firefighter safety. Any firefighter can get involved by attending. There's public meetings. They can submit public comments. You guys were mentioning the TIAs and stuff. There's comments. There's even you can also apply to be on a committee. And that's really critical to the standards development process, is having those voices, because at the end of the day, it's your, as a firefighter, your safety on the line. So the more input from the field, the better. We're always encouraging firefighters to speak up. You gotta get that real life frontline perspective. It's really key.
Bill, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think Wells covered most of it. I think just kind of in general, the NFPA standards development process really kind of hinges on 4 kind of components, and those are public input. So at any time, NFPA, as it relates to these standards, is accepting public inputs and so on and so forth as it relates to the standards, which are all accumulated for the next iteration or the next evolution of the standard. Once the standards are being developed, there's a process as well where first draft of these are being published, and end users and those people who are directly affected by that can put in public comments about the first draft or the draft proposal or the draft document. So they have an opportunity to really be involved. And as a member of a committee, I can tell you that each one of those public comments are addressed in the development process. So it is an effective way to have your voice be heard as it relates to that. And then, of course, as Wells mentioned, you can apply to be on a technical or correlating committee. And I think those are the most difficult positions to get filled, are the enforcers, those people like fire marshals and those, people who are actually enforcing standards, and of course, end users. So getting the user community to get involved. So it's, as Wells mentioned, there's a very strict adherence to balance on the committee so that it's not influenced more heavily by one, vested interest group than another. So, from the manufacturer's side, we're pretty heavily impacted by what these standards say. So we like to be represented, but we can only be represented up to, our balanced level of representation on the committee. So always looking for end users, firefighters, to get involved in the standards development process.
Well, as they say, you got to be in it to win it. So, it's critically important that we all get involved. And it's interesting, whenever you talk about the fire service, different fire departments, there are always, I guess you could call them wizards in some areas, so you're going to have your apparatus wizard who will be very, very involved with that. You're going to have your PPE wizard, and you can probably break down break it down into each component. There's probably a person in each department that knows each different component of the PPE better than anybody else. So it's critical that those people get involved. But also, as you said, sometimes they're maybe like a battalion chief level or something like that, where we also do still need the firefighters that are crawling down the halls, to get involved with this as well, because they're going to be able to tell you the most about what works for them and what does not. So like I said, you got to be in it to win it. Well, that just about brings me to the end here. But I did want to find out, from both of you. Bill, I'll start with you. Do you have any final thoughts on what we've talked about on 1970 in general, or do you have one takeaway that you would like the audience to walk away with after they view or listen to this? Bill?
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity, Chris. I guess the one thing that I would say that's going to be kind of interesting is some of the changes that we're making or that have been made with regard to the NFPA 1970, particularly as it relates to, soft goods, the fabrics and so on and so forth that go into turnout gear and, of all levels of PPE. It's important to recognize that the coatings and the materials and so on and so forth that were used in these products historically had served a very important purpose. They weren't put there, haphazardly. They really felt like they needed the effects that these things cause with regard to firefighting. In those cases, we're taking kind of well-established things and we're changing those. And there's a need for new products and new development and so on and so forth. So there will be impacts with regard to the product itself. Hopefully, hopefully all of them will be positive impacts, but the reality is that there are unintended consequences associated with that. We're starting to see now the kind of PFAS or PFAS-free outer shells or so on and so forth that were brought out in the turnout gear environment back in probably around mid to late 2021. What we're seeing, it appears, is that this product doesn't perform in all aspects as well as the products used to perform. Certainly with water repellency and particularly with repellency of contaminating chemicals and petrochemical type products and so on. So, in some instances, that's shortening the life cycle of these products, which is certainly not an intended consequence, an unintended consequence. So there'll be a lot of learning and a lot of development that's going to be going on long past the actual implementation date of this standard. So we'll be busy working on that. So we'll see how that goes.
Well, the good news there is, the fire service is always moving forward. We always know that when these are changes, but we do also know that when a new product or a new innovation, a new technology comes out, it does evolve and it gets better over time. So, I think that's important as well, that, we are going to continue to move forward. Anything that's been identified is going to be improved upon. I think that's important to note as well. Wells, how about you? Any final thoughts on this of 1970 or anything else we've talked? Any takeaways that in particular you'd like people to walk away with?
Yeah, I think I liked what you said about being in it to win it, right? And a good thing about firefighters is they're not shy, right? Like often very willing to share their real opinions, which is why we love protecting them. I guess what I would say is just enabling firefighters to go home safely at the end of the day. That's the goal, right? That's why we're all in this. That's what we're all in this for. And that's why it's so critical to innovate for and with firefighters. That's why I think podcasts like this are super important, because you can educate firefighters about standard changes, that they can make informed decisions, and that they can also maybe even get involved and be in it to win it, right? And, we're always learning at Bullard, and I'm sure at every manufacturer. And so I just encourage firefighters to keep learning too, and keep, as you said, moving forward.
Great. Perfect. Well, I want to thank you both very much for sitting down with me today to talk about this. We're going to be continuing to talk about some of the other standards that are out there as well, with some of FEMSA's leadership. So again, my thanks to you both for that. If there is something that you would like FEMSA's representatives to cover, please let me know and I'll get it back to them. I'm at chris.mcclune@clarionevents.com. If you would like to watch any of our previous FEMSA podcasts, they're all archived at fireapparatus.com/podcast. So again, my thanks to you both for joining me today. This has been Chris McClune with Fire Apparatus and Emergency Equipment. Have a good one and stay safe. Thanks again.